This is Book 1, Revenge of the Witch of the Wardstone Chonicles, written by Joseph Delany, Part 1, Chapter 1. The Seventh Son. When the spook arrived, the light was already beginning to fail. It had been a long, hard day, and I was ready for my supper. "You're sure he's the seventh son?" he asked. He was looking down at me, shaking his head doubtfully. Dad nodded. "And you were seventh son too?" Dad nodded again and started stamping his feet impatiently, splattering my breeches with droplets of brown mud and manure. The rain was dripping from the peak of his cap. It's been raining for most of the month. There were new leaves on the trees, but the spring weather was a long time coming. My dad was a farmer, and his father had been a farmer too. And the first rule of farming is to keep the farm together. You can't just divide it amongst your children. It gets smaller and smaller with each generation until there's nothing left. So a father leaves his farm to his eldest son. Then he finds jobs for the rest. If possible, he tries to find each one a trade. He needs lots of favors for that. The local blacksmith is one option, especially if the farm is big and he's given the blacksmith plenty of work. Then odds on that the blacksmith will offer apprenticeship. But still, that's only one son sorted out. I was his seventh, and by the time it came to me, all of the favors has been used up. Dad was so desperate that he was trying to get the local spook to take me on as his apprentice, or at least that's what I thought at the time. I should have guessed that Ma'am was behind it. She was behind a lot of things. Long before I was born, it was her money that bought our farm. How else could a seventh son afforded that? And Ma'am wasn't counting. She came from a land far across the sea. Most people couldn't tell, but sometimes if you listened very carefully, there was a slight difference in the way she pronounced certain words. I still don't imagine that I was being sold into slavery or something. I was bored with farming anyways, and what they called the town was hardly more than a village in the back of beyond. It was certainly no place that I wanted to spend the rest of my life. So in one way, I quite liked the idea of being a spook. It was much more interesting milking cows and spreading manure. It made me nervous though, because it was a scary job, and I was going to learn how to protect farms and villages from things that go bump in the night. Dealing with ghosts, boggarts, and all manner of wicked beasties would be all in the day's work. And that's what the spook did, and I was going to be his apprentice. "How old is he?" asked the spook. "He'll be 13 come August. A bit small for his age. Can he read and write?" "Aye," Dad answered. "He can do both. He knows Greek. His ma'am taught him, and he could speak it almost before he could walk." The spook nodded and looked back across the muddy path beyond the gate towards the farmhouse as if he was listening for something. Then he shrugged. "It's a hard enough life for a man, never mind the boy," he said. "Think he's up to it?" "He's strong, and he'll be as big as me when he's fully grown," my dad said, straightening his back and drawing himself up to his full height. That done, the top of his head was just about level with the spook's chin. Suddenly, the spook smiled, and it was the very last thing I expected. His face was big and looked as if it had been chiseled from stone. Until then, I thought he'd be a bit fierce, and his long black cloak and hood made him look like a priest. But when he looked at you directly, his grim expression made him appear more like a hangman weighing you up for the rope. The hair sticking out from under the front of his hood matched his beard, which was gray, but his eyebrows were black and bushy. They were quite a bit of black sprouting out of his nostrils too, and his eyes were green, the same color as my own. Then I noticed something else about him. He was carrying a long staff. Of course I seen that as soon as he came within sight, but what I hadn't realized until the moment was that he was carrying it in his left hand. Did that mean that he was left-handed like me? It was something that had caused me no end of trouble at the village school. They even called in the local priest to look at me. He kept shaking his head, telling me I had to fight it before it was too late. I didn't even know what that meant. None of my brothers was left-handed, and neither was my dad. My mom was cack-handed, though, my right, and it never seemed to bother her much. So when the teacher threatened to beat it out of me and tied a pin to my right hand, she took me away from the school, and from that day on, she taught me at home. How much to take 'em on? My dad asked, interrupting my thoughts. Now we were getting down to the real business. 2 guineas for a month's trial. If he's up to it, I'll be back in the autumn, and then you'll owe me another 10. If not, you can have 'em back and then just another guinea for my trouble. Dad nodded again, and the deal was done. We went into the barn, and the guineas were paid. But they didn't shake hands. Nobody wanted to touch a spook. My dad was a brave man just to stand within 6 feet of one. I've some business close by, said the spook, but I'll be back for the lad at first light. Make sure he's ready and don't keep me waiting. When he'd gone, Dad tapped me on the shoulder. It's a new life for you now, son, he told me. Go and get yourself cleaned up. You're finished with farming. When I walked into the kitchen, my brother Jack had his arm around his wife Ellie, and she was smiling up at him. I like Ellie a lot. She was warm and friendly, in a way that makes you feel like she really cares about you. Ma'am says that it was good that Jack married Ellie. She helped make him feel less agitated. Jack is the eldest and biggest of us all, and as sometimes Dad jokes, the best looking of the ugly bunch. He's big and strong, all right, but despite his blue eyes and healthy red cheeks, his black bushy eyebrows almost meet in the middle. So I've never agreed with that one. One thing I never argued, that he managed to attract a kind and pretty wife. Ellie has hair the color best quality straw 3 days after a good harvest, and skin that really glows in the candlelight. I'm leaving early in the morning, I blurted out. The spook's coming for me at first light. Ellie's face lit up. You mean he's agreed to take you on? I nodded. He's given me a month's trial. Oh, well done, Tom. I'm really pleased for you, she said. I don't believe it, scoffed Jack. You, Spook's apprentice? How can you do the job like that when you still can't sleep without a candle? I laughed at his joke, but he had a point. Sometimes I saw things in the dark, and a candle was the best way to keep them away so I could get some sleep. Jack came towards me with a big roar and got me in a headlock and began dragging me around the kitchen table. It was his idea of a joke. I put up enough resistance to humor him, and after a few seconds he let go of me and patted me on the back. Well done, Tom, he said. You'll make a fortune doing that job. There's just one problem, though. What's that? I asked. You'll need every penny you earn. You know why? I shrugged. Because the only friends you have is the ones you buy. I tried to smile, but there was a lot of truth in Jack's words. A spook worked and lived alone. Oh, Jack, don't be cruel, Ellie scolded. It was only a joke, Jack replied, as if he couldn't understand why Ellie was making such a fuss. But Ellie was looking at me rather than Jack, and I saw her face suddenly drop. "Oh, Tom," she said, "this means you won't be here when the baby was born." She looked really disappointed. It made me feel sad that I wouldn't be at home when my new niece arrived. Ma'am had said that Ellie's baby was going to be a girl, and she's never been wrong about things like that. "I'll come back and visit as soon as I can," I promised. Ellie tried to smile, and Jack came up and rested his arm across my shoulders. "You'll always have your family," he said. "We'll always be here if you need us." An hour later, I sat down to supper knowing that I'd be gone in the morning. Dad said grace as he did every evening, and we all muttered amen. Except Ma'am. She just stared down at her food as usual, waiting politely until it was over, and as the prayer ended, Ma'am gave me a little smile. It was warm and special. I don't think anybody else noticed, but it made me feel better. The fire was still burning in the grate, filling the kitchen with warmth. At the center of our wooden table was a brass candlestick, which had been polished until you could see your face into it. The candle was made out of beeswax, and it was expensive, but Mom wouldn't allow tallow in the kitchen because of the smell. Dad made most of the decisions on the farm, but in some things, she always got her own way. As we tucked into our big plates of steaming hot pot, it struck me how old Dad looked tonight. Old and tired, and there was an expression that flickered across his face from time to time, a hint of sadness, but he brightened up a bit when he and Jack started discussing the price of pork and whether or not it was the right time to send for the pig butcher. "Better wait another month or so," Dad said. "The price is sure to go higher." Jack shook his head, and they began to argue. It was a friendly argument, the kind of families often have, and I could tell Dad was enjoying it. I didn't join in, though. It was all over for me. As Dad has told me, I finished with farming. Ma'am and Ellie was chuckling together softly. I tried to catch what they were saying, but by now Jack was in a full flow, and his voice was getting louder and louder. When Ma'am glanced across at him, I could tell she had enough of his noise. Obvious to Ma'am's glances, and continued to argue loudly. Jack reached across for the salt shaker and accidentally knocked it over, spilling a small cone of salt on the table top. Straight away he took a pinch and threw it back over his left shoulder. It was an old county superstition. By doing that, you're supposed to ward off the bad luck you earned by spilling it. "Jack, you don't need any salt on that anyways," Ma'am scolded. "It spoils a good hot pot, and it is an insult to the cook." "Sorry, Ma'am," Jack apologized. "You're right. It's perfect as it is." She gave him a smile and nodded towards me. "Anyways, nobody's taking notice of Tom. There's no way to treat him on his last night at home." "I'm all right, Ma'am," I told her. "I'm just happy to sit here and listen." Ma'am nodded. "Well, I got a few things to say to you after supper. Stay down in the kitchen and we'll have a little talk." So after Jack, Ellie, and Dad had gone up to bed, I sat in the chair by the fire and waited patiently to hear what Ma'am had to say. Ma'am wasn't a woman who made a lot of fuss at first. She didn't say much apart from explaining what she was wrapping up for me. A spare pair of trousers, 3 shirts, and 2 pairs of good socks that has only been darned once each. I stared into the embers of the fire, tapping my feet on the flags while Ma'am drew up her rocking chair and positioned it so she was facing directly towards me. Her black hair was streaked with a few strands of gray, but apart from that, she looked much the same as she had been when I was a toddler. hardly up to her knees. Her eyes were still bright, but for her pale skin, she looked a picture of good health. This is the last time we'll get to talk together for quite a while, she said. It's a big step leaving home and starting out on your own. So if there's anything you need to say, anything you need to ask, now is time to do it. I couldn't think of a single question. In fact, I couldn't even think. Hearing her say that had tears prickling behind my eyes. The silence went on for a while. All that could be heard was my feet tapping on the flags. Finally, ma'am gave me a little sigh. "What's wrong?" she asked. Has the cat got your tongue?" I shrugged. "Stop fidgeting, Tom, and concentrate on what I'm saying," ma'am warned. "First of all, are you looking forward to tomorrow and starting your new job?" "I'm not sure, ma'am," I told her, remembering Jack's joke about having to buy friends, and nobody wants to go near a spook. I'll have no friends. I'll be lonely all the time. "It won't be as bad as you think," ma'am said. "You'll have your master to talk to. He'll be your teacher, and now, no doubt, he'll eventually become your friend. And you'll be busy all the time, busy learning new things, and you'll have no time to feel lonely. Don't you find the whole thing new and exciting?" "It's an exciting job. It's exciting, but the job scares me. I want to do it, but I don't know if I can. One part of me wants to travel and see places, but it'll be hard not to live here anymore. I'll miss you all. I'll miss being at home." "You can't stay here," ma'am said. "Your dad's getting too old to work, and come next winter he'll be handing the farm to Jack. Ellie will be having her baby soon, no doubt the first of many. Eventually there won't be no room for you here. No, you better get used to it before that happens. You can't come home." Her voice seemed cold and a little sharp, and to hear her speak to me like that drove a deep pain into my chest and throat, so that I couldn't hardly breathe. I just wanted to go to bed then, but she had a lot to say. I'd rarely heard her use so many words and all in one go. "You have a job to do, and you're going to do it," she said sternly. "And not only to do it, you're going to do it well. I married your dad because he was the seventh son, and I bore him 6 sons so that I could have you. 7 times 7 you are, and you have the gift. Your new master is still strong, but he is some way past his best, and his time is finally coming to an end. For nearly 60 years he's walked the county lines doing his duty, doing what he has to be done. Soon it'll be your turn, and if you won't do it, then who will? Who'll look after the ordinary folk? Who will keep them safe from harm? You'll make the farms, villages, and towns safe so that women and children can walk the streets and lanes free from fear." I don't know what to say, and I couldn't look her in the eye. I just fought to hold back the tears. "I love everyone in this house," she said, her voice softening. "But in the whole wide county, you're the only person who's really like me. As yet, you're just a boy who's still growing, has a lot of growing to do. But you're the 7th son of a 7th son. You got the gift and the strength to do what needs to be done, and I know you're going to make me proud of you." "Well now," ma'am said, coming to her feet, "I'm glad that we got that sorted out now. Off to bed with you. It is a big day for you tomorrow, and you want to be at your best." She gave me a hug and a warm smile, and I tried really hard to be cheerful and smile back. But once up in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, just staring vacantly and thinking about what ma'am had told me. My ma'am is respected in the neighborhood. She knows more about plants and medicines than the local doctor. And when there is a problem with delivering a baby, then the midwife always sends for a ma'am. She is an expert on what she calls breech births. Sometimes a baby tries to get born feet first, but my man is real good at turning them while they're still in the womb. Dozens of women in the county owe their lives to her. Anyways, that's what Dad always said, but ma'am was modest. She never mentioned things like that. She just got on with what needed to be done, and I knew what she expected of me, so I wanted to make her proud. But she could really mean that she only married my dad and had my 6 brothers just so she could have birth to me? It didn't seem possible. After thinking things through, I went across the window and sat in the old wicker chair for a few minutes, staring through the window which faced north. The moon was shining bright, bathing everything in a silver light. I could see across the farmyard, beyond the 2 hay fields and the north pasture, right to the boundary of our farm, which ended halfway up Hangsman Hill. I liked the view. I liked Hangsman's Hills from a distance. I liked the way it was the furthest thing you could see. For years, this has been my routine before climbing into bed each night. I used to stare at the hill and imagine what was on the other side. I knew it was really just more fields, and then 2 miles further on what passed for the local village, a half-dozen houses and a small church, and a smaller school, but my imagination conjured up other things. Sometimes I imagined high cliffs with a ocean beyond, or maybe a forest or a great city with tall towers and twinkling lights. But now as I gazed up on the hill, I remembered my fear. Yes, it was fine from the distance, but it wasn't a place I'd ever want to get close to. Hangman's Hill, as you might have guessed, didn't get its name for nothing. 3 generations earlier, a war had raged across the whole land, and the men of the county had played their part. It had been the worst of all wars, the bitter civil war, where families had been divided, and where sometimes brother had even fought brother. In the last winter of the war, there'd been a big battle a mile or so north, just the outskirts of the village. When it was finally over, the winning army had brought their prisoners to this hill and hanged them from the trees on its northern slope. They hanged some of their own men too, for what they claimed was cowardice in the face of the enemy. But there was another version of that tale. It was said that some of these men had refused to fight people they considered to be their neighbors. Even Jack never liked working close towards the boundary fence, and the dogs wouldn't even go more than a few feet into the wood. As for me, because I can sense things that others can't, I couldn't even work in the north pasture. You see, from there I could hear them. I could hear the ropes creaking and the branches groaning under their weight. I could hear the dead strangling and choking on the other side of the hill. Ma'am said that we were like each other as well. She was certainly like me in one way. I knew she could also see things that I couldn't. One winter, when I was very young and my brothers all lived at home, the noises from the hill got so bad one night that I could hear them from my bedroom. My brothers didn't hear a thing, but I did, and I couldn't sleep. Ma'am came to my room every time I called, even though she had to be up at the crack of dawn to do her chores. Finally, she said she was going to sort it all out, and one night she climbed Hangsman Hill alone and went up to the trees. When she came back, everything was quiet, and it stayed like that for months afterwards. This has been part 1 of the Revenge of the Witch series. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.